Mark lived in a neighborhood that seemed peaceful from the outside, but his own home felt less peaceful every passing week because of one troubling habit that his neighbors had formed without his permission. He had a clean blue pool in his backyard that he built after saving for many years, and he always imagined evenings where he would sit beside the water and enjoy quiet moments after long hours at work. For a while that dream felt real, but then something started happening that slowly took away all his comfort. His neighbors began using his pool as if it belonged to them, and the worst part was that they never thought they were doing anything wrong. It began one summer afternoon when the kids next door came to him and asked if they could use the pool because their own small pool pump was not working. Mark was a polite man who believed kindness kept a neighborhood healthy, so he agreed, thinking it would only be for one short day. He sat inside watching them laugh and splash, and he felt fine about it since he wanted to be a good neighbor. The trouble began a week later when Mark returned home early from work and noticed loud splashing in his backyard. He looked through the window and saw the same kids jumping into the pool, but this time they had not asked him. He stepped outside and calmly reminded them that they needed permission before entering someone's property. The kids apologized and left quickly, and Mark hoped the message was clear. The next day he came home to find wet towels scattered near the pool, even though he had been gone all afternoon. He realized the kids were using the pool whenever they wanted, and he felt a sting of frustration, but he kept telling himself that maybe the kids would understand with time. Unfortunately, the situation grew far more serious when their parents also began taking advantage of his quiet nature. One Saturday morning Mark heard voices and laughter from the backyard, and when he stepped outside he was stunned. His neighbor Linda was sitting comfortably on one of his pool chairs with sunglasses, while her husband grilled food on a portable grill they had carried through his gate. It looked like a private pool party that he had never approved, and yet they behaved as if they had every right to be there. Mark took a deep breath, trying not to lose his calm, and explained that he needed his privacy, and that the pool was not open to others without his permission. Linda only gave a light smile, and said she thought he would not mind since the kids used it already. Mark felt annoyed, but he kept his tone polite and asked them to leave. They gathered their things, slowly whispering among themselves, as if he was the unreasonable one. For a few days silence returned, and Mark enjoyed peaceful evenings again. He swam alone, relaxed, and breathed fresh air without any noise or disturbance. He hoped the problem had finally ended. But one afternoon everything took a dramatic turn that pushed him far beyond his limit. He came home early because an important meeting got cancelled, and he walked to the backyard expecting a quiet moment near the water. Instead he stopped at the door in shock. There were at least 6 people in his pool, including neighbors he barely recognized from 2 houses down. Towels were thrown everywhere. A loud music speaker sat on one of his chairs. Even his pool toys were being used without permission. It looked like a party that no one had bothered to tell him about. Mark stepped forward and cleared his throat loudly. The group turned to look at him with surprised faces, as if they did not expect him to exist at all. Linda walked forward and asked why he was home early, which felt strange because it was his home, not hers. Mark felt irritation rising, and this time he did not try to hide it. He told them directly that this was his property, and no one could enter without permission. Instead of apologizing, some people looked annoyed. One man even joked that the pool looked lonely when Mark was away, so they were helping him keep it useful. That joke pushed Mark further into frustration because it showed they had no respect for boundaries. He told everyone to leave immediately, and his voice carried a firmness that no one had heard from him before. The group slowly packed their things and left through the gate, still muttering comments under their breath. When the backyard finally became quiet again, Mark locked the gate and sat inside feeling defeated. He had tried kindness. He had tried patience. He had tried communication. Yet nothing worked because his neighbors believed his silence meant approval. He realized that if he did not change something soon, his entire summer would be spent dealing with unwanted guests. He felt tension building inside, but he forced himself to take a deep breath and think carefully. He needed a plan that would make it impossible for anyone to enter his pool without his knowledge. He needed something that would teach a clear lesson without any loud arguments. That night he stayed up late at the dining table with a notebook. He listed ideas one by one, but none of them felt strong enough. Putting up a warning sign seemed weak. Talking again would be ignored. Building a tall fence would take too long and cost too much. Then slowly an idea formed in his mind. It was simple. It was clever. And it would end the problem in a way no one would forget. For the first time in days, Mark smiled because he finally felt in control again. The next morning he drove to a hardware store and bought several items that did not look important to anyone else, though they were exactly what he needed. When he returned, he carried everything to the backyard and began setting up his plan. Some neighbors peeked from their windows trying to guess what he was doing, but no one dared to come close after the incident the previous day. Mark stayed focused and worked carefully step by step. By the afternoon, the setup was complete. It blended so naturally into the pool area that most people would not notice it at first glance, but Mark knew it would make a huge difference. He stepped back, admired his work, and felt a wave of satisfaction. His pool finally had protection, and he no longer felt powerless. Now he waited for the moment when someone would try to sneak in again, because he knew it would happen sooner or later. And when it did, his clever plan would change everything. Because Mark was done being the quiet neighbor who accepted everything. He was ready to take back his home, and he was ready to show exactly what happened when someone pushed a patient man too far. Mark woke up the next day feeling more confident than he had felt in weeks. His plan was ready, and his backyard felt different now, not because of any big construction but because of the feeling of control he finally had. He made breakfast and sat near the window sipping tea while watching the sunlight fall over the pool. For the first time in a long while he felt calm, because he knew that the next person who tried to enter without permission would be met with a surprise they would not forget. Still, he wondered how long it would take for someone to test his boundaries again. In that neighborhood, patience was not a common thing, and respect had become rare. By noon, Mark had already received curious looks from neighbors. People walked slower than usual near his house, trying to understand what he had done. He pretended not to notice and worked on his garden calmly. He picked out dry leaves, trimmed a few plants, and watered the flowers, all while keeping an eye on the gate. The warm weather made it tempting for anyone wanting a quick swim, and Mark suspected it would not take long before the temptation would win. In the early evening, Mark heard soft voices outside his backyard fence. At first it sounded like the kids from next door. They whispered in a way that suggested they were planning something. Mark stayed quiet and listened. One kid asked the other if they should use the pool again since Mark seemed busy in the house. The second kid reminded him that Mark got angry last time, but the first one insisted that adults get angry all the time and then forget. Mark sighed at that, because it was clear the kids still did not understand boundaries. A few minutes later he heard the gate rattling lightly. Someone was testing it. Mark did not move. He watched through a small gap in the curtain as the gate slowly opened. Two kids stepped inside with towels over their shoulders. They looked around to make sure Mark was not nearby, then walked toward the pool, excited to jump in. Mark had expected this moment, and he waited for the exact second when his plan activated. The kids dipped a toe into the water and immediately jerked back with wide eyes. The pool water felt colder than they expected. Much colder. In fact, it felt like winter, even though the sun was shining brightly. They touched it again and pulled back, shivering slightly. One kid asked the other why the pool felt like ice. The second kid shrugged and said maybe Mark had some kind of special cooling system. They tried once more, but the water was so chilly it made their teeth chatter. Swimming became impossible, and they slowly backed away, confused. Mark had installed a safe temperature control system that activated whenever someone touched the water without unlocking a small panel he had set for himself. It did not harm anyone. It simply made the water cold enough that no one could enjoy it. The kids dropped their towels and left the backyard, quickly whispering about how strange the pool had become. Mark watched them leave and smiled softly, because the first phase of his plan was working perfectly. Later that night, Linda knocked on his door. Her expression was firm and slightly annoyed. She told Mark that her kids said the pool water was freezing and asked if something was wrong. Mark stayed polite and simply answered that the pool was working exactly how he wanted it to, and that no one should be touching the water without permission. Linda did not like that answer. She tried to argue, but Mark calmly repeated that he valued his privacy and his property needed to be respected. Eventually, she walked away looking frustrated. The next day, word spread faster than Mark expected. Neighbors whispered that something was different about the pool, and some said Mark had installed advanced technology to protect it. Others claimed he had become unfriendly, though Mark knew that was only because he had stopped allowing free access to his property. Still, he continued his routine as if nothing unusual was happening. But soon another moment came that tested his patience even more. In the late afternoon, a small group of adults from 2 houses down gathered near his gate. They talked in low voices, looking irritated, as if they believed they had been denied something they deserved. One man finally opened the gate and stepped inside with confidence. He walked straight to the pool, dipped his hand into the water, and yelped loudly before pulling it back. The others laughed at him, but curiosity pushed them to try it as well. Each one touched the water and pulled back, instantly complaining about how cold it felt. Mark stepped outside at that moment with a calm expression. He asked them why they were in his backyard without permission. The man with the wet hand replied that they only wanted a quick swim and did not mean any harm. Mark stood firmly and explained again that permission was necessary. Instead of understanding, they began saying that a neighborhood should share resources and that Mark was being unfriendly. Mark reminded them that he paid for the pool maintenance, repairs, and cleaning, and that no one else contributed. The group became quiet because they knew he was right. After a moment, they walked out silently, leaving Mark alone in the yard. He felt tired but relieved because his plan was not only working but also teaching a lesson without any argument or anger. However, the real test came a few days later when a larger neighbor gathering appeared. Linda and her husband hosted a small barbecue and invited many people, including those who believed the pool should be open for everyone. Music played and laughter echoed through the neighborhood. As the day grew hotter, people looked toward Mark's pool again, as if they were tempted to try their luck one more time. Sure enough, 2 adults walked to the gate and peeked inside. They whispered that maybe the water had returned to normal. They opened the gate and stepped in while others watched from the barbecue. Mark noticed from his kitchen window and waited quietly. One man dipped his hand and jerked back with a loud gasp. The cold water struck again. The small crowd at the barbecue laughed at his reaction, and someone shouted that the pool was haunted by winter. Mark stepped outside and stood near the fence watching calmly. The adults apologized and backed away. A few neighbors asked if the water was meant to behave that way. Mark smiled and explained that the pool now had a feature that activated when someone touched the water without permission. He said it was a simple protection method to keep his property safe. The crowd became silent, and slowly the message spread to everyone at the barbecue. From that moment forward, no one dared to enter his pool without asking. But something unexpected was about to happen next. Something that would test his patience in a completely different way. Mark had protected his pool, but now the neighbors were planning something new, something that he never saw coming. Mark believed that the cold water system would end all the problems, and for a short while he truly felt free from the stress that had been building for months. His pool stayed calm and untouched, and no one stepped inside his backyard without permission anymore. He enjoyed his evenings again, sitting beside the water reading, or simply resting after long days. It felt peaceful, but the neighborhood was not done with him yet, because people who once used something freely do not easily accept boundaries. Soon a different kind of issue began forming, and Mark slowly noticed signs that something was brewing around him. It started with neighbors acting extra polite in an unusual way. People who once ignored him or walked past him without a greeting now smiled with wide, friendly faces. Linda waved at him as if they were best friends, even though she had been annoyed just days earlier. Her husband offered Mark fresh lemonade one afternoon, which surprised him because he had never shown any interest before. Kids who once sneaked into his yard now tried to chat with him sweetly, asking about his day. Mark sensed something was off because all this sudden kindness did not feel natural. It felt like a plan was forming behind those smiles. One day when Mark was returning from the grocery store, he overheard 2 neighbors talking near the street corner. They did not see him approaching, and their words made everything clear. They were saying that if they could convince Mark to host a neighborhood pool day once a week, it would be easier than sneaking in. They believed that if they acted nice, he might feel guilty and agree to share the pool. Mark stopped quietly behind a tree, listening as more neighbors joined in the conversation. They talked about ways to make him feel included and how sharing the pool would make the neighborhood more united. Mark walked home feeling disappointed. He was not angry this time, but he felt sad that people still did not understand his point. He did not want to be rude to anyone, but he also needed his personal space. He wanted peace, something simple, something that every person should have in their own home. Instead of respecting the boundary, his neighbors were now planning emotional pressure. That night he sat on his couch thinking about what to do. He did not want conflict, but he also did not want to be pushed into something he never agreed to. His cold water system had solved one issue, but now a different one had appeared. The next morning there was a knock on his door. Mark opened it to find Linda and her husband standing there with a basket of cookies. They gave wide smiles and said they wanted to thank him for being a good neighbor. Mark accepted the basket politely, though he could tell this was not a simple gesture. Linda then casually mentioned that the weather was getting warm and people were hoping for a fun gathering soon. She hinted that the neighborhood felt disconnected and that a pool party could bring everyone together. Mark answered kindly but firmly, saying he needed his privacy. Linda kept smiling, but her eyes revealed disappointment. She tried again in a softer tone, saying kids missed swimming and adults needed a break too. Mark repeated calmly that the pool was private and he did not want to host any weekly event. After a few more attempts, both of them left looking dissatisfied. Still, the neighbors did not stop. Over the next week, several people tried different methods. Some brought gifts. Some pretended to invite him to small events, hoping he would feel obligated to return the favor. Others began mentioning how lonely the pool must feel without visitors. Mark realized they were trying emotional tricks instead of respecting a simple boundary. He knew he needed to take action again, but this time carefully, because he did not want anyone to feel insulted. That weekend, Mark decided to install a second part of his plan. He had thought of it earlier but did not feel the need until now. He visited a hardware store and bought a small automatic alarm sensor system that connected to his phone. It was not loud or dramatic. It simply alerted him whenever someone entered his backyard without permission. It was a soft, gentle reminder that kept everything safe and allowed him to act quickly. He installed it near the back fence where most people tried to sneak in before. The system was discreet and blended into the fence easily. Now he could monitor his backyard even when he was not outside. He felt a bit more relaxed after setting it up and went inside to rest. That evening, as the sun began to set, Mark received a notification on his phone. It showed someone entering the yard. He rushed to the window and saw a couple from 2 houses down walking toward the pool holding towels. They whispered to each other, saying they only wanted to test if the water was still cold. Mark stepped outside and they froze when they saw him. They tried to smile awkwardly, but Mark did not raise his voice. He simply reminded them again that his pool was not open to others and that entering his backyard without permission was not allowed. They apologized and left with embarrassed faces. However, the situation escalated the next day when a larger group attempted something Mark had not expected. A few adults and kids gathered outside his gate during the late afternoon. They discussed whether they should all go inside together so Mark would not be able to confront everyone at once. They believed he would feel overwhelmed and give up. Some even suggested that if enough people entered, he might open the pool for everyone just to avoid trouble. Mark watched the scene unfold from his living room window. He saw the group planning and he realized they did not understand that he was not trying to be unfriendly. He simply wanted privacy in the home he worked hard for. He felt a mix of sadness and frustration because the neighborhood was turning a simple issue into a battle. As the group prepared to enter the gate, Mark stepped outside and walked toward them. His presence caught them by surprise. He spoke in a calm, steady voice, explaining that he never wanted conflict and he never wanted to appear rude. He said he respected everyone and hoped they respected him too. He told them he needed his home to remain a place of peace and he could not allow his pool to become a public space. The group listened quietly. Some people nodded, understanding his point, while others still looked disappointed. After a long pause, they slowly began to leave. Mark felt relieved, but he knew the tension in the neighborhood was not over. People did not like hearing the word no, even when it was fair. As night fell, Mark sat outside near the pool thinking about everything that had happened. His cold water system worked. His alarm system worked. His message was clear, yet the neighborhood still had mixed feelings. He knew something bigger was coming because people who feel denied often try again in new ways. And soon Mark would face the biggest challenge of all, a moment that would force him to take a final step that no one saw coming. The days that followed felt calmer for Mark, but the calm had a thin, fragile layer because he sensed that the neighborhood was not fully ready to let the matter rest. People greeted him politely, but their smiles carried a quiet tension, as if a story was unfolding behind their eyes. Some neighbors accepted his boundaries while some remained bothered even if they no longer tried to enter the pool. Mark noticed that whenever he stepped outside, a few people whispered among themselves, though they stopped when he looked their way. He wanted peace, not conflict, and he hoped everything would fade on its own, but life rarely moves the way one hopes. One Thursday afternoon, Mark returned home early from work and saw something that confirmed his suspicion. A large signboard had been placed at the end of the street inviting everyone to a neighborhood meeting. The sign encouraged all residents to join and discuss ways to make the community more connected. Mark understood immediately that this meeting was not about general matters. It was about him. It was about the pool. He sighed softly and carried his groceries inside, trying not to let the growing stress take over. As evening arrived, he sat at his dining table thinking about whether he should attend the meeting or ignore it. If he ignored it, the neighbors might create a plan that affected him anyway. If he attended, he would have to face a large group that might pressure him again. He did not want to fight, but he also did not want to lose his voice. After a long moment of thought, he decided he needed to be there. He needed to speak clearly once and for all. The meeting was held in a small community area near the park. When Mark entered, people turned toward him with mixed reactions. Some nodded politely, while others whispered with curiosity. Linda stepped forward, as if she had been expecting him. She welcomed him with a friendly tone, but her eyes carried determination. She started the meeting by talking about unity and how shared activities strengthened bonds between neighbors. Mark listened calmly, though he already understood where the conversation was heading. Soon a man raised his hand and said the neighborhood needed a common place to relax, especially during warm days. Another woman mentioned how children missed swimming and how Mark's pool had once brought joy. A few people insisted that the neighborhood should find a way to share resources fairly. Mark sat quietly, letting them speak without interrupting. He wanted to hear every concern before responding. When Linda finally turned to him and asked for his thoughts, the room fell silent. Mark stood up slowly and looked around at the crowd. His voice stayed calm but steady. He explained that he understood the desire for community togetherness, but the pool was part of his home and not a public place. He reminded them of the damages and the messes he often found when people used the pool without permission. He mentioned the noise he had endured and the lack of respect he had received. He said he wanted to be a good neighbor, but he also needed peace in the house he worked years to build. Some neighbors nodded thoughtfully, but a few protested, saying they were careful and did not cause problems. Mark gently pointed out that even careful visitors changed the atmosphere of his home. He said privacy was important and a person should feel comfortable in their own space. His words were simple, honest, and without anger. Slowly the murmurs faded and the room grew quiet. A moment of reflection passed through the group. People looked at one another as if realizing that they had seen the issue only from their own viewpoint. Linda lowered her gaze, knowing she had pressured Mark more than she should have. Another neighbor stood up and said Mark had every right to protect his home and no one should make him feel guilty for it. The mood shifted and the tension began to dissolve. The meeting moved to other topics and Mark felt a weight begin to lift. When he walked home afterward, a few neighbors stopped him to apologize or thank him for speaking honestly. It felt like a new beginning, a chance for things to settle in a healthier direction. For the first time in a long while, Mark felt hopeful. But the story was not over yet. A week later, on a warm Saturday morning, Mark received a message on his phone from the alarm system. Someone had entered the yard again. Mark rushed outside thinking it was another neighbor, but stopped when he saw who it was. It was a young boy from 2 streets away, sitting quietly near the edge of the pool with his feet touching the water. He was not splashing or making noise. He looked sad, as if he had come there not to play but to find comfort. Mark approached gently and asked him why he was there. The boy explained that his family was facing some problems at home and he needed a quiet place to sit. He said he remembered the pool because it always looked calm and peaceful. His voice was soft and honest, and Mark felt his heart soften. This was not like the others who wanted parties or gatherings. This was a child looking for a moment of peace. Mark sat beside him and listened to his worries. They talked for a while, and when the boy felt better he thanked Mark and left quietly. Mark watched him go and realized something important. His pool was not the problem. The problem had been the lack of respect from people who used it carelessly. But sometimes kindness needed space too. He understood that protecting his home did not mean he had to shut himself away from everyone. It simply meant respecting boundaries and offering kindness in ways that felt right. The next week, Mark invited a few respectful neighbors for a small gathering. Not a pool party, not a loud event, just a simple friendly moment to rebuild trust. He made clear rules that everyone accepted happily. The air felt lighter, the conversations were calm, and for once everyone behaved with genuine understanding. The neighborhood slowly adjusted after that. People learned to respect the gate. No one tried to enter without permission anymore. Kids asked politely and often accepted when Mark said he was busy. Linda apologized sincerely and even offered to help with yard care as a gesture of peace. The community felt different, not because the pool was shared often, but because boundaries were finally understood. Mark finally found the balance he had been searching for. His home became peaceful again. His pool remained private, but not surrounded by conflict. And he discovered that protecting his space did not make him unfriendly. It made him confident, calm, and able to choose kindness when it truly mattered. In the end, Mark's story spread through the neighborhood as a reminder that respect is worth more than convenience, and a simple pool can teach a whole community how to value someone else's space. His patience had limits, but his heart still held room for understanding, and that combination changed everything for the better.